consumer-focused live service game or business. So not necessarily just a game business, but anything that's kind of focused on a subscription service or consumers coming to your website and spending on a regular basis. All right, so why build a forecast? I think the key objective is more about performance benchmarking than anything else. I think building a forecast helps you get honest about how you tend to scale your business, and it helps you track your performance against those goals over time. It also has the benefit of helping you with your financial planning and budgeting. It's costly to build a game, and it's even more costly to scale a game. So having a strong forecast can help you make sure that you're budgeting your resources appropriately. It can help you identify risks in your plan, and around those risks help you focus on strategic decisions, mainly around resource allocation. Like, how are you going to spend the limited amount of time and resources you have? What are the best priorities for you to focus on? And a forecast can kind of show you where those opportunities are. Okay, so what is a forecast? It's a predictive model that simulates player behavior. And in the context of a game forecast, there are kind of three systems that we're interested in modeling. One is installs. How do we understand what is our potential player base? Retention. How are we going to project against those installs? How are we going to project ongoing engagement? And then a revenue model, resulting in converting that player interest into monetizable actions. All right. Hopefully, before you've even started building your game, you've already started to think about how you're going to reach your audience. So it starts with audience insights, identifying who your potential players are and how you will reach them, where they are at, how you get to them there. Understanding the total addressable market. What I mean by this is, like, what's the total number of people in the marketplace who are interested in playing your game? And that number is not, right, it's not the total number of people who have phones, or it's not, all males 18 to 24. It's a very specific number for your genre. And maybe the best way to identify your total addressable market is use a tool like data AI, and we'll talk a little bit about that more, to look at competitive products, to find the biggest competitive game in your genre, and look at their lifetime installs. And that kind of will tell you what is that total addressable market that you can go after. You should have already thought about strategies for acquiring your users. Where your organic installs going to come from? Those are going to be, word of mouth installs, or viral installs, or people who are just searching for a particular type of game or a particular keyword. And then you should always also be thinking about paid installs. How are you going to acquire those early installers who might start the organic flywheel for you? And then, there's a number of different channels that you can use to get paid installs. So thinking about, are your players playing other games and you're going to show them ads in other games? Are they searching in the App Store? So you're going to use keyword campaigns to find your paid installs, or are they on social media and you're going to use TikTok or Facebook targeting to find those installs? And then finally, you should have thought about what funds you have allocated for marketing. Again, you may ultimately be wanting to focus on organics, but if you start that flywheel, you're going to have put aside some amount of money to kind of get traffic into your game, to validate your early funnel, to make sure your game is standing up. And then again, to start that flywheel, there's a relationship between organic installs and paid installs. When we drive paid campaigns, we often see organic installs also inflect as a result of paid campaigns. Some of that is halo. Some of it is like players may have seen an ad multiple times, and instead of clicking on the ad, they actually go to the App Store and they search for the game that they've seen. And some of it could be kind of those viral halos. It could be that people have seen the ad or started playing the game and then told their friends about it, and that usually kind of corresponds at the same time that you're driving paid installs. So you get this pairing of organic and paid installs together, and we'll talk more about that later as well. Hopefully you're familiar with install funnel. You can think of your installs as a funnel where each step in that funnel can be optimized to increase the total number of installs your game can get. So, and I'm just kind of going to run through the list of places that you might optimize. Ad impressions, like that what's in that ad creative, what's the player's first exposure to what your game is about that's going to get them interested and want to click on the ad. There's a call to action usually in the ad that can entice players to click, like install now or play now. Making sure that you have that language right and measuring the number of players who actually click on the ad and improving the click-through rate on an ad is where you get a lot of most of the inflection from. Then when players click, they're going to end up on a landing page where they're gonna see more about your game, and they might even interact with content there, looking at the description or looking at the screenshots or trailers, optimizing how you present that landing page and what content you have on that landing page can inflect the number of players who ultimately pass through this funnel and result in an install. There's the download initiation and then also finishing a download. So thinking about how big is the game that you're downloading, how much is up front for the download, and then how much kind of streams in over time, and making sure that download is pretty small so that the instant gratification, the time between players seeing the ad and actually being in your game is as short as possible. And then first launch. I mean, even after someone has downloaded and installed the game, they may not have actually opened the game. So, what are the aspirations, or what are the call to actions? Sometimes there's like incentives that you can add to the ads. This week, log in to get this benefit that hopefully completes that cycle, and the players actually open the game. It's not an insignificant number of players who will download and install a game and never open it. So making sure that you've left players from that ad impression all the way to the first launch with some tantalizing aspiration that's gonna draw them back, particularly if your download is going to take a few minutes and they may have put the phone down in the meantime. All right, moving on. So modeling installs is really about accurately estimating your CPI or cost per install. So your CPI is generally that direct cost of acquiring a user through a paid advertising campaign. So again, you're going to start with a cost for a number of impressions, and those impressions are going to result in a number of installs, and dividing that total cost by the total number of installs is the CPI. But maybe more importantly is the eCPI, the effective CPI, which is the complete cost of acquiring a user through paid and organic installs. And in other words, this is kind of back to what I was mentioning earlier, the organic halo that you can get from paid installs. You're going to have a lot of non-attributable installs. If you're running a big campaign, particularly, there are going to be a lot of installs that didn't click directly on the ad and therefore can be accounted as a direct cost. There are going to be a bunch of people who, again, search after seeing the ad several times. They may search in the store and find it. So an eCPI gathers all of those installs in a given period. So you basically divide all the installs you get on a given day by the amount of ad spend that you've done on a given day to derive what that eCPI is, and it's a little bit more accurate cost estimate. And then here at the bottom of this slide, I've given an example of a way that you can help discover what your eCPI is, or your CPI is actually, fairly inexpensively. It's fairly common for games in early development to run Facebook ads or run kind of fake ads that when you click on the ad, what it actually takes you to is a survey. And there's some qualitative value that comes from doing the survey. You can get a little bit about what was it about the ad creative that enticed the player? How likely are they to play this game or to recommend it to another player? You can often end up gaming these kinds of experiences by making a highly provocative ad, which wouldn't actually result in an install, but it will result in a lot of clicks because people are like, what is that ad about? And this can kind of help you determine like what is the player's motivation for clicking on the ad. And again, I think at this level, the goal of this is to run like a small ad campaign, a few hundred, maybe a few $1,000s, and then get a sense for how many people are clicking through. It's going to give you a baseline CPI. It can also help you. You've got multiple types of creative that you're thinking about running. If you're thinking about testing different game names or different ad images, it can help you discriminate between like which of those ads is going to perform best for you. So it's maybe it's less effective as a real number of, because when you're only spending $100 or $1,000, your CPI is going to usually be pretty low because you're not trying to drive a lot of volume. So it's less as an absolute, but it'll give you kind of a baseline, like what's the lowest CPI you think you're going to ever get. And again, if it's like $10, then you're going to realize, well, that's, you know, maybe that's not a great ad creative, or maybe this is not a great genre to kind of go after unless you've got deep pockets for that kind of spend. I kind of rambled on there a minute. Let's move to the next slide. So predicting installs is fairly straightforward. Your daily installs are your daily user acquisition budget divided by the eCPI. So you're going to take the amount of money that you've allocated for user acquisition. You're going to divide that. If you've got an annual budget, you're going to divide that into a number of months, and then for any month, you're going to divide that into a number of days. And if you can kind of guess what your CPI is going to be, you can guess. You're going to estimate the number of daily installs you can expect. And so one tab of your game forecast is just going to be this giant spreadsheet that's a calendar with this formula for each day. How much UA budget did you have, and what's the eCPI, and generally you're going to want that eCPI is going to change. CPIs change based on let me finish the thought and I'll answer the question. CPI is going to change on market conditions. You know, another game in your category is starting to scale. There's a movie coming out that has a similar theme. You're going to get a bunch of like organic halos because your game looks like a Dune game, and there's a Dune movie coming out, so people are going to be searching Dune. So if Dune is in your title, you're going to get a bunch of organic installs. It's going to lower your CPIs. And maybe more importantly is the volume of your UA spend. As you spend thousands of dollars per day, you're going to get one eCPI. If you spend $10,000 a day, that CPI is going to go up. If you're spending, you know, each logarithmic step you step up, that you're basically spending against yourself. You're driving the price of your own installs up. So somebody had their hand raised. Did I miss the name? Marco?
No, it was me, Troy, Chris. But you actually answered my question. I was going to ask how eCPI scales as your budget increases, but you answered it. So thank you.
No, it goes up, and it goes up fairly quickly. So it often feels like as you're pushing on the accelerator, the wind is blowing back at you harder and harder. If you're scaling very slowly, it's not hard to maintain a CPI and keep it consistent for a long period of time. If you're only driving a few hundred or a few thousand installs a day, but the problem is churn, right? Like, you know, some number of those players are going to churn out, and usually you need to be at a certain DAU level, a certain number of daily active users to be able to support your business, because you've got all of the fixed cost of your employees and your servers. And so, you know, your challenge is to get to that scale where you're profitably operating your business and you're arresting churn, and you're able to do that without having your CPIs go crazy. Another factor that will change your CPI is like how much of your addressable market have you churned through. So you can kind of think of your audience as a series of concentric rings, like a bullseye target. And at the very center of the target is your golden cohort, right? They're going to cost you the least to acquire, and they're the most valuable users you'll ever get. And as you move in the kind of quintiles or the concentric rings outwards, each ring outwards is going to cost you more and is going to make you less. And at some point, those two lines cross, right? You're going to spend more than you're making, and then you should stop installing. And as you're going to as you move out of those rings, you kind of move through less and less qualified audiences. So again, at the very center, you've got the golden cohorts. They are searching the App Store every day for a game like yours, and they're going to come for free. And then as you move out from there, you're going to get people who are like, I love games of this genre. I just love playing games on my mobile phone. And then at the very outer rings, you're going to get the people who are like, I'll try anything once, which, you know, just very unqualified. They're going to cost a lot to get because you have to show them the ad like 50 times before they're like, fine, I'll try your game. And then when they come in the game, they're going to be a looky-loo. They're going to be like, oh, I played this kind of game before, or this isn't the kind of game for me, or I'll play anything once for 5 minutes and then move on to the next thing. All right, moving on. All right, so now that we've understood where installs are coming from and how much they're going to cost us and how many we're going to get per day, the next system we're interested in modeling is retention, because that's going to tell us how many of those players are going to continue to engage with our game over time. So how many of those installs are we going to retain day over day? And the retention formula is also very simple. It's the number of players returned on day X divided by the total number of players who installed on day 0, kind of as a cohort. So you're going to look at that day 0 cohort. How many people do you get on day 0 of this cohort? And then you divide that number, or you divide the number of players on day X by that number. And you're usually you're not looking at every day. You're kind of looking at these key milestones. And particularly when you're building a game forecast early, you're really looking at the early funnel. So it's like day 1, day 3, day 7, day 14, and day 30. Those are kind of the key milestones for early retention and forecast building. We also do care about day 60 and day 90 and day 180 and day 365, but those are really hard to measure the impact of changes to, because you got to wait a really long time to see if you're going to be making changes in your game, and you're trying to measure the impact on retention of those changes. It takes a really long time for you to kind of see that impact on LTV. And it's very a priori, like before your game has got a day 30, it's really hard to know what a day 60 or a day 90 or a day 180 should look like. Those key milestones come with time, as opposed to being able to something you can derive early in your forecast. So thinking about, I should talk about bound and unbound retention before jumping into how to derive day 1 through 30. So some companies use unbound or rolling retention. The difference between bound and unbound. So bound retention is the number of players who played on day 7, and we only care about day 7. And unbound retention is rolling retention is the idea that someone who played on day 10, you also count them for days 1 through 9. So in bound retention, I only care if you came back on day 7. That's a day 7 retained user. In unbound retention, if you came on day 10, I also count you as a day 7 retained user, whether or not you actually opened the app on that day. And some companies do use unbound or rolling retention. It's a little bit of a vanity metric, like it's going to make your retention look better. Kind of pros and cons of bound and unbound. Or why would you? I called it a vanity metric, but unbound does have a value, particularly when you're looking at long-term retention. The number of players who are actually going to play on day 365 is infinitesimally small. But you might have made changes that are going to have impacts way deep in the funnel. And sometimes using unbound retention for those like long-term retained users gives you a sense of like, actually, not many people showed up on day 365, but there were people on days 361 and 362 and 363, 366. And by measuring all of those people, you can get a better insight into like changes that I'm trying to affect that deep in the funnel. You have something to measure against. So that's mainly how they are valuable. They're not particularly valuable for like day 1 through 30. They tend to overestimate. It's a complex way to generate retention. And for the purposes of a forecast, I only care about if you actually open the app that day, because only people who actually open the app can spend. And ultimately, this forecast is about estimating revenue. So for the purposes of this model, bound, and I'm sure you could build a forecast model around unbound retention. Once you have a bunch of conversion rates against that unbound, you can figure it out. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, I'm going to move on from this to how to build a retention curve. Generally, you only have retention data for a few key milestones. And from those milestones, you're going to extrapolate the in-between days. And that allows you to project a future curve. And we usually use power law distribution to do that. A graphical representation of your retention curve can really help you identify areas for improvement or what your engagement trends are over time. So this is basically what that looks like, right? You can just make a chart and plot the key points along the chart, and it's automatically going to make a visual curve. So you can kind of see maybe where you have a dip or the curve is not particularly smooth. You have a cliff. There's a bunch of drop off at some place, and that might tell you, right? Like, hey, I've got a problem at D7. There's this huge cliff. You know, we had a bunch of people retained, and then suddenly at day 7, people hit a wall and they just dropped out of the app. So visualizing this is a very easy way for you to kind of see where are those bumps in your funnel, in your retention funnel. But for the purposes of building a mathematical model, you need to actually be able to extrapolate like what is the specific retention value on each given day. And to do that, you use this idea of exponential interpretation. It's a way to fill in the known, to fill in the gaps between known data points. That's the interpolation part, where the points change at a rate that's exponential. So that's the exponential part. And you don't have to remember all of this here. I'm going to share a tool. But basically, the idea is you're going to derive a ratio between known values. So say we know the value for day 3 and day 7, and we want to know the value for day 5. We're going to compare the values for day 3 and day 7, and we know day 5 is step 2. We know day 5 is halfway between day 3 and day 7. So that fraction or 0.5 in this case is used in the calculation. And then step 3, we take the ratio from step 1 and we raise it to the power of the fraction in step 2. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, because I struggle with this as well, ChatGPT is your friend, and it knows all about exponential interpolation, and it can tell you how to build a forecast model to do this, which is how I built this. This is a tool that I'm sharing with you guys here in chat. It's open, so all of you can open it, and I would suggest making a copy because it may not always be available to you, and also that you can edit it without messing up everyone else's copy of this spreadsheet. And just very quickly, I'll take you through what's here. You're going to put your current known retention in that blue column, and then to the right there you see improvement, that little kind of gold area. You can then calculate what is the level improvement you need to make to hit your target retention. And then below that is an LTV curve, and we'll talk a little bit more about how LTV curves look. But if you look down the column of interpolation, you'll see that there's a formula that I'm using to derive the retention on each given day, and it's basically an implementation of the ratio that I just talked about. Then again, if you're confused, just copy paste the formula into ChatGPT and ask it to explain it to you, and it will. All right. Now that we have installs and retention, we can model our daily active users, or DAU. So we know installs is our UA spend divided by our eCPI, and retention is the number of players on the current day divided by the number of players who played on day 0. And our retained installs are on a cohort basis, the day 0 installs times the retention for today, for the day N. And DAU is our current installs for today plus the sigma of all retained installs. And again, I know it's a little formulaic, so I can show it to you visually, and this is a much easier way to understand how to estimate DAU. You can see on day 1, on Monday, we installed 1,000 users. So our DAU for Monday was 1,000 users. On Tuesday, we installed another 1,000 users, and our day 1 retention for our Monday cohort was 50%. So on Tuesday, we have 500 users that we installed on Monday who came back, and we have the 1,000 new users we installed on Tuesday. So our DAU is 1,500. And again, similarly, on each day, we take the retention for that cohort to figure out how many players came back from that cohort on that day, and the number of new installs that we have. So the time we reach Friday, we have had 5,000 total installs, but our DAU is 2,400. Hopefully that all made sense. The visual way of showing. All right, I'm just going to move on. All right, so ARP DAU is a type of ARPU. ARPU meaning average revenue per user, but that's kind of a meaningless metric without knowing a time period. So ARP DAU is average revenue per user for a given day, right? So it's basically the total revenue on a given day divided by the total number of daily active users on that day. And as a result, right, because its denominator is DAU, ARP DAU is very sensitive to changes in player engagement. Day of week effects, for instance, like you just generally have more users playing the game on the weekends. Players going to come back on Friday and Saturday, and they play less on Mondays and Tuesdays. So you're going to have a lot of ARP DAU volatility just based on like day of week effects. But it's also sensitive to your install volume. So higher install volume equals higher DAU, and that generally tends to lower your ARP DAU. And then the corollary, if you just stop spending UA entirely, your DAU is generally going to go up because you're going to have retained payers are going to continue to stick around, and you're not going to be installing a bunch of looky-loos. You're going to be installing a bunch of like non-qualified users who whatever show up and play one day. So it's going to tend to drive down your DAU and drive up your ARP DAU. So how do you figure out what your ARP DAU is kind of a priori? And there's two methods I'm going to talk about. One here, I mentioned earlier, data AI. So data AI is an aggregator of statistical data around mobile games. They basically track all the games in the store and through some analytical tools. Basically, a lot of these games use data AI as a resource for tracking their own data, and as a result, data AI gets a little bit additional sort of corollary data. They know like, hey, you're number 200 on the top grossing chart, and you made like whatever $35 million this month, and they can sort of see different key points along that top grossing, so they can estimate anyone in the in-betweens what they must be making. So it's mostly inferential. It's usually off a little bit, maybe plus or minus 20% of actuals, and then in some cases games that have a lot of revenue that's being driven by ads, these tools don't pick up ad revenue. So things like hyper casual games look like they're totally unprofitable, but they just because they don't show up in data AI's metrics. And I'm jabbering a bunch. Basically, benchmarking is you go and you find a competitor, and you use data AI's tool to kind of figure out, well, this top chart is how many active users. This is Madden, so this is like a tool we would have used early on Rivals to figure out, what's an ARP DAU target that we should have. So I'm looking at what are all the active users that they have, and then what is this bottom chart is the store revenue for any given day, and then I'm just charting that. I've taken for each day, I've taken total revenue, and I've divided it by the total installs, and it's giving me the blue line, which goes up and down. They're kind of their day of week effects, or maybe they're driving installs a lot on one day and less on another, so you get those spikes. Or those spikes could also be those are days that they've added a new item for sale. There's a new pack of cards that's available. So there are going to be days that are going to have higher ARP DAU and days that are have lower ARP DAU. But in general, for looks like the month of January, they had about a 28-cent ARP DAU. So then I can use that as a baseline for what ARP DAU might be in my game, which would be similar to Madden. Yeah, Lucas.
Yeah, I have a question. I think you touched something really interesting there, and I would love to have your insights on that. I think a lot of us are kind of in this stage where we have this bullseye user base you mentioned earlier, like really dedicated players that are pushing your games, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering, when you're trying to make those prediction models, are you like kind of basing it off of the players you currently have, because those can be quite biased, right? Or are you trying to look at competitors, which may also be like a completely different direction? So do you try to like get it in between, or do you like maybe run a first ad campaign to see how your specific game is going? Like, how do you get started on that data?
Well, so ad campaign's not going to tell you much about ARP DAU. I think, if you've got a golden cohort in your game, they can definitely tell you what your top end is, right? Like they're like unqualified users or just general population users coming in your game are generally not going to spend as much as your golden cohort. So they can kind of tell you like what is the top peak performance, and then you can do a halo around like, maybe there's not one game that has the spend characteristics that your game has, but maybe there's a little bit from game A, and there's a little bit of your game is inspired by game B and a little bit by game C. And so you could use a combination of those things and then weight them. So you could use like, hey, here's my existing cohort and what their ARP DAU is. And here's, game A that has a similar battle pass feature to mine. And here's game B that's got a similar, event system to mine. And you can then average those together with a weighting to kind of figure out, well, I think 10% of my audience is going to be super fans, and 90% of my audience is going to, come for the events. And here's the two spin characteristics of those two different audiences averaged together with that weighting table. This is a dark art, right? Like there's no, and I kind of get to this at the end, like forecasts are lies. Like it's the thing you hear about statistics of, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and then there's forecasting. Forecasts are never going to be accurate. The value of forecasting is doing the forecasting. The value of forecasting is continually iterating the model that you have. So initially you're going to be really off, but as your game matures, as you add more and more users, your data is going to get more and more accurate, but still not be accurate because every day that passes is more change to the model. Like other games are going to come out, players are going to get bored with what you have. And so nothing else changes. Your spin characteristics are going to just change by virtue of nothing changing. And if you're adding new features to your game all the time, then spin characteristics are going to change based on the features that you're adding. So there's no hard and fast guaranteed rule to get a good ARP DAU. There's and a live ops too. There's a bunch of assumptions that you're going to make that are going to be wrong, and then you're going to improve your assumptions over time by trying new assumptions.
Yeah, so I guess kind of what you're getting at, maybe I understand it correctly, is don't stress too much about the numbers at first. Maybe more generally try to kind of see how it plays out in your game yourself to see actual influences of those, right? Rather than stressing too much about, hey, I want to get the perfect prediction model from the beginning. Yeah,
totally. And I have at the very end of the slide is basically exactly that. Don't sweat the individual details, and some advice around how not to do that. Again, I think the value of forecasting comes from the discipline of forecasting. You get the value here by relentlessly iterating the model, not a priori. It's not that like you're going to be able to guess accurately what the forecast is. Though last month I was only off by 2%. Is that right, Nick? I think even though all of the assumptions were wrong, the model still came off right by 2%. I think
it was less than 2%. I think I think it's like one and a half.
That came from 9 months of model iteration to get to that kind of accuracy. And now we're entering the off season where I have no data on what off season looks like, so my model is going to be totally wrong. Moving on. So there's another way to do ARP DAU estimates, and maybe you should do both of these. You should have kind of a top-down model that comes from looking at competitors, and this conversion estimates is more of a bottoms-up model where you basically list out every SKU and every price of things that players are going to buy in your game, every purchase type and its price, and then you're going to estimate a daily conversion rate. And again, early on, if you haven't been doing this for a while and have a sense for how different kinds of SKUs convert, you're gonna definitely be in the dark here. But as time goes on and you accumulate that data for your specific game, conversion estimates is going to become more and more accurate way of estimating your ARP DAU. So your ARP DAU contribution, basically you multiply each one of those SKUs by its conversion rate, and it gives you a weighted contribution for each SKU to the overall ARP DAU. And then you just sum up all of those contributions to get your total ARP DAU. And again, I have a visual here to kind of step you through in a number of ways to do that here. So again, simple example. I've just listed out every SKU in my game. I got a coin bundle. I got a battle pass. I got some gotcha tokens. And then each of those has a price. So the coin bundle's $5 and the battle pass is $10. And then there's a conversion rate. On a per day basis, what percentage of players of your DAO are actually going to buy that coin bundle? And these are all just made up numbers, by the way. These don't really correlate to any actual, so don't put any stock in these. But then taking that conversion rate times the price gives you an ARP DAO contribution. So basically 3.5% of $5 is 17 cents. And you can kind of goal seek your way here too, if like you have a sense of like, hey, looking at Madden, we think our ARP DAU should be about 45 cents, and we think like most of that's going to come from the battle pass, and some of that's going to come from gotcha packs, and a very small amount is going to come from coins, and you can kind of goal seek your conversion rates to get to that distribution. And again, just rule of thumb. Generally, conversion rates are in this range, right? Like 2%, 3%. conversion rate in a mobile game is kind of standard fare. But you can also have days where, again, you release a new feature. We just had at the end of February released some new features where we had 9% conversion rates on that particular day, and then then you have the drop off, of kind of a tail where those conversion rates are going to come down until you launch another big feature or another SKU. You're going to kind of drift back down into this middling range of 2 to 3%. All right. So maybe a note before the next chart: gross versus net ARP DAU. So ARP DAU comes at a cost. There are platform fees, and if you've got a license like NFL, then you have royalties and license fees that you have to pay. So the gross ARP DAU is how much payers pay you directly, but net ARP DAU is actually how much you get to keep after you've paid your Apple and Google their 30% cut in any license or royalties. And for LTV and ROAS forecasting, it's better to factor in those costs so that you're not fooling yourself into thinking you're making a lot of money that you're not. Maybe in vanity metrics, if you're looking to wow investors, you may rather use your gross ARP DAU. But from a forecasting perspective, we almost always use net. So here's that same chart with net. So we've got a 30% platform fee. So of that 47 cents for my conversion estimates, I'm only going to keep this 33 cents. So yeah, it is sad. It is sadness. And then similarly for secondary volume, so like that was just primary SKUs, IAP SKUs in the App Store, but maybe your game has a marketplace where players can buy different SKUs from each other. So in that case, you can do a similar conversion estimate. So here, these are just swags that, like in our game, we've got mythical cards and legendary cards and epic cards and rare cards, and these each kind of have a cost basis. Like a mythical card, sometimes they're worth $1,000, whereas rare cards can go for as little as $1 or $2. So again, you just apply a conversion rate to that, which is going to give you an ARP DAU contribution for each of those rarity tiers. In your game, maybe there's a different structure, a different organization. Maybe there's land and there's fighters and there's equipment, and each of those has a different cost basis and a conversion rate. And then we recognize as revenue the secondary fees on that GMV. So there might be 30 cent ARP DAU contribution from the total sales going back and forth between players. But in terms of what we can recognize as revenue or in the Mythical marketplace, we have a 14% take rate. So our actual ARP DAU contribution from that GMV is about 5 cents. Hopefully that all made sense. So conversion estimates, pros and cons. And maybe starting with the cons, it depends a lot on assumptions, and it has the potential for errors to compound, because if you're going to list every possible SKU and you're off by a certain percentage, you're just going to compound that with every SKU. And it's also very complex. If you've got a very strong live operations program and you're constantly adding new SKUs into the game, it can get very unwieldy to kind of maintain the forecast with an ongoing number of SKUs over time, and also player behavior is dynamic. Things that they've done in the past isn't necessarily indicative of things they're going to do in the future. But generally, conversion estimates are a more accurate, granular way of estimating ARP DAU. And they also let you make strategic decisions, because maybe you expected to generate a lot more money from your battle pass than you did, and this would give you the visibility. If you're just looking at the gross ARP DAU, it's like, well, ARP DAU isn't as high as we thought it would be. Why is that? And with a conversion estimate, you can go in at a SKU basis and go like, well, look, the coin packs are way overperforming. Where players are buying a lot of coin packs. So maybe there's something in the economy going on that we didn't realize, that we're not giving out as much currency as we thought we were going to give out, or players are being bound up and having to spend to progress. And similarly, maybe battle passes aren't selling as well. So we can look and say, is that surfacing? Are we not marketing it well enough? Do players not know about the battle pass, or are the rewards in the battle pass not enticing enough, or is progress through the battle pass last month was too painful, and so players have decided not to buy it this month? Doing that level of estimation, that granular level estimation, gives you actionable forecasts to switch strategy around. And again, accuracy is going to improve with data as you do this more and more. These estimates for like a new pack that's going to come out, your estimate is going to be more and more accurate as you know what past packs sold for. All right, so now we have all the pieces now to build a forecast. We've estimated our installs. We've applied a retention curve to predict DAU for each day, and we've determined what our ARP DAU target is, either net or gross. And then we just multiply each day's predicted ARP DAU by the ARP DAU target to create a daily forecast. So here in the bottom, you see each day I've got a DAU that I've gotten from my estimated installs and retention curve, and I've got an ARP DAU target, and I multiply those two together, get me revenue, and then I total up my revenue to figure out what's my total revenue for a given time period. And here is the ultimate forecasting trick. As I mentioned a number of times, things change over time. And one of the tough things about forecasting is that, you know, if you forecast a fixed ARP DAU or a fixed retention rate for the whole year, it looks like you're doing nothing to improve the game. So a trick here is to build a calendar lookup into your forecast that can dynamically adjust your ARP DAU and retention targets based on your feature roadmap. So in this example, I've got a new feature that's going to add 10% to my ARP DAU. It's, you know, whatever. I'm going to release a battle pass on that day. And so in my forecast, it can dynamically then switch the ARP DAU on the day that feature is going to release, and you can sort of then estimate future potential into your forecast, not just based on backwards looking performance. All right, a few more topics on forecasting. One is forecasting LTV. We can also use the retention curve from the interpolation column. So again, this is from the tool that I shared. We can use the retention curve in our interpolation column in combination with our ARP DAU target to determine our LTV. So you basically recognize a percentage, the interpolation percentage of that ARP DAU. So for on day one, right, I'm recognizing 48% of that 25%, that 25 cents. That gives me an LTV on day one of 12 cents. And then on day two, I can recognize 42% of that 25 cents. It's going to, you know, increment another 10 cents to that LTV, and so on. And it creates this curve where, you know, this is generally what an LTV curve looks like in a mobile game. Because of churn, players are going to spend mostly early in their life, and so you're going to have this fairly rapid growth in the LTV curve. And then the game all becomes about like how long can you retain those users, because growth of that curve is going to slow, but the longer you can extend their life, the more you can kind of grow it over time. So maybe half of the total LTV may come in the first 30 days, and then the second half of the LTV is going to come over the next 365 days. Hopefully that made sense. So waiting for a ROAS to mature to its full LTV target, though, takes a really long time. So ROAS, or return on ad spend, is a way for us to understand performance in a much shorter time scale. It's basically a percentage of eCPI that's recovered in a given time period, usually a few days or a couple of weeks. And by understanding our ROAS and how we're mapping against our ROAS targets can give us a sense for the trajectory of that LTV curve. And that will allow you to make very quick decisions about a given install source or a given install campaign. So again, understanding your performance on a cohort basis can help you like increase spend on a good source or a good ad campaign, and then stop spending on a bad source or a bad campaign. So a little bit more about how to calculate ROAS. So for instance, again, ROAS is usually paired with a time period. So in this case, we're interested in our D14 ROAS, which is, again, the percentage of eCPI that we'll have recovered by day 14. And let's say that our eCPI, our cost to install a user, is about $4. And our LTV curve says on day 14 that we'll have made back about $1.20. That basically means that we have a 40% D14 ROAS target. And usually up front, you want to have like a chart that here is what our ROAS targets are for D1, D7, D14. And that will allow you for each cohort that you're installing to understand very quickly how are they tracking against that target. Are they overperforming? And if so, then increase spend. Are they underperforming? If so, then analyze why. Is it traffic mix? Is it the channel? Is it the ad creator? You're running a new ad campaign and it's just not as effective as it was, and either adjust or stop spending. Hopefully that made sense. It was a little quick on ROAS, but things have kind of changed, evolved from being focused on LTV to be focused on these very short time periods around ROAS. Okay, so high level, just some how am I doing on time? Oh, really close. Some high level thoughts on forecasting. Understanding before you start forecasting, what are you trying to answer with your forecast, right? There's kind of two different ways two different asks that I get for my forecast. One is a bottoms up forecast, which is very detail driven, and it's something that the team will use. It's something that helps the product managers on a given team understand the performance of their game and where it could be better or where are they underperforming, overperforming. And then there's the executives, and the executives are much more interested in a story to tell about how they're going to hit a particular goal. And in which case you're trying to build a top-down model. And the exercise is less about being accurate and more about telling a story. So understanding which of those two goals you have with your forecast will change how you kind of approach the assumptions and the level of detail in your model. Second point, we kind of talked about this earlier with Lucas. Forecasts are never accurate, right? They make assumptions and simplifications, and it's really important not to sweat the small stuff and really focus on the big picture. And in fact, this is kind of the next point. Overly complex forecasts really slow to use, and they compound error. And I've been bitten by this many times. It's almost always the case that less is more at a forecast level. There are times where you're trying to forecast individual feature performance, and it may make sense to do a more complex forecast, but mostly for the purposes of strategic alignment, as opposed to being accurate with a forecast. The point isn't that your forecast is going to be accurate and tell you the right number. It's that the constituent assumptions in the forecast are going to give you information about what decisions you should be making, where are the best places to inflect, where's the most leverage going to come from a given feature, and forecasts can help you then make hard calls about how to prioritize work. As your forecast gets better, it's going to grow in complexity. As you identify problems in your model, you're going to be like, oh wow, I really under forecast how this particular feature was going to retain users. And it may make sense to then change how your model works to incorporate some new insight that you have. But again, be careful not to build an overly complex forecast. I have forecasts that are so complex that, I mean, like now, currently, I have forecasts that are so complex. When I make any change in the forecast, I'll have to wait 2 or 3 minutes for the whole forecast to resolve, which is not an ideal place to be. You don't want to have yeah, I know. You don't want to have an exec pounding on the table like, tell me what the number is. I've got to tell the board a number. You don't want to have that problem when it takes 2 to 3 minutes for every change that you make to your forecast to actually update. All right, and then the last point is that forecasts decay. Even if all these other things were perfectly executed, forecasts require iteration because the world we live in is dynamic. Players' behavior changes, new games come out, things in your game get stale. You add new features to your game. So the most important part of forecasting is forecasting. The most important part of forecasting is being diligent and being consistent about revisiting your forecast assumptions. All right. In closing, core of your business boils down to this basic balance between cost per install and lifetime value. And many development teams focus very heavily on optimizing lifetime value without really grasping the critical role that cost per install has. Because it's not just about how much users are spending, how much money you're making, but it's about how much it costs to acquire them. And this is no joke, right? Like games, for instance, games on the web, because you can't drive installs through Steam. Even games that would on mobile cost $1 or $2 to install could cost $10, $20 an install to install on a PC platform. And this has to do with friction and how players experience ads and how they get to games. On a mobile game, on a mobile device, most of the time that players install a game, they're playing a game. And then there's some offer like, oh, you can double your points this round if you watch this video ad, and you see an ad for another game that you're interested in, and you're on the device right there, and you're in a game playing mode right at that moment. That's a very effective place to reach an audience. Whereas, in a PC world, maybe you're not playing a game right there. You're browsing the internet, and you see an ad on Reddit, or you see an ad on Twitter. Are you going to stop doing what you're doing right then and play the game? No, you're in this other mode right now. Maybe you'll remember about it later. Maybe you'll make a note to yourself to download it. And as a result, those installs are very expensive because the funnel breaks down. So thinking about how much it costs to install your users, it really comes to this turning point about scalability, right? You need to have a positive return on your ad spend at some time period that's meaningful, right? Like return on ad spend 5 years from now is not a very effective way it's not a very predictable way to run your business. If you could get a return on your ad spend within a month, man, you could scale that game all day. You can recycle the money that you've spent from last month's cohort into next month's cohort. So again, the point that I'm making with this balance between LTV and cost per install is that the turning point for scalability comes when your lifetime value surpasses your cost per install, or that at least you can accurately predict that your lifetime value will surpass your cost per install. And this signifies that you have a healthy business model, and it opens the door for growth opportunities. All right. And then the last point, and it kind of goes back to the point on the previous slide about forecasting, is about forecasting. CPI fluctuations it can kill you. The fluctuations are impacted by all these things: market conditions, seasonality, competition, the effectiveness of your creative, the day of the week, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, the volume of installs you yourself are trying to drive. So recognizing and understanding how those elastic components work, it's critical for accurate forecasting, and for instance, not blowing your entire ad budget, in the first month of your game, and then finding out that there are all these optimizations you can make in the funnel and all of these improvements that you can make to LTV, but it's already too late because you spent all your money in month one, and those users have now churned out, and there's no way to bring them back. So I jabbered for 56 minutes. I got to the hour. I'm going to stop sharing now, and maybe we can go to questions if folks have questions. Yes, please. Sugmeet.
So thank you for this session. It was really helpful. And what I'm trying to build is a Zexify. That's a platform that helps Web 2 games transitions to Web 3. Not just with the NFT, but other side of the equation, and not sacrificing the UX. So adding tournaments and adding zeitgeist prediction markets on it. And we did a case study with using NFL Rivals to showcase how we can do these things in NFL Rivals. So I had 2 questions there. First was, how would a costing model affect, how would, from your experience, if it is a new feature and you guys have already done that, let's say Mythical is already in this journey for a very long time. So from your experience, how would you at that time had done the forecasting of adding this migration to either Polkadot or to having now tournaments and everything else, or prediction model? That's what my question was.
Yeah. For movement to Polkadot probably won't impact major KPIs in our game because we're not a very crypto focused game. We're acquiring mostly football fans and game players, and the degree that Web3 or crypto or NFTs are available in our game is very liminal. We tell players that it's a marketplace, but we never say this is crypto or that these are NFTs. So I'm not the Polkadot thing, maybe not. But in terms of prediction market and the value that it would create for the game, first I'd want to understand more about the KPIs or the enhancements that you've seen in past games. Does that help mostly retention, or are there ways that increases monetization? My assumption would be it's mostly a retention feature. It creates a little bit more interest for players, that not only are they playing the game, but they're able to make predictive guesses about the game and then come back. They want to come back to see whether their guesses were correct or not. So my assumption would be that a predictive model would increase short-term retention. And then I would kind of look at our existing retention and guess, what are the calls to action? Are they fairly short time periods? Is it 1 or 2 day or 3 day prediction windows? Those are going to be more effective. Generally, short time duration anticipatory return works better than say, hey, you need to come back in a month and then find out whether your prediction or will players even be playing the game or remember that they had this opportunity to come back in a month. So if they were structured in a way that there's a call to action within a few days, then I might gonna look at 5% to 10% boosts in early retention, and then measure against that and adjust based on that estimate. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I had one follow-up question: is
Yep.
there a lower level that you will be targeting, like in retention, that if this much percentage moves, then only it is worth investing or not in your forecast model?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so that happens at a roadmap level. So normally, what we have a million ideas of what players are asking us to do, what the game team has identified that they want to do, what our competitors are doing that we don't have as best practices, and we'll have this huge backlog of all these different things that we could do, but we've got a limited amount of bandwidth that we can execute in any particular sprint, right? And the way that we decide what things are going to move above or below that line is this predictive exercise, right? Usually that's not what the forecast tool is for. The forecast tool is for anticipating revenue and allowing the business to kind of plan operationally around our costs, our expenses, and our income. But we're still doing that at a micro level for every feature, and that's usually wisdom of the crowd, right? We've got a lot of smart people who have different perspectives. I got engineers who can talk about how hard or easy something is to implement, and I've got designers and product managers who've worked on other products in the past, and they've seen how similar features might have performed. And then I've got like executives who have desire to see a specific story that they can tell to an investor in a game, and all of those impact how we kind of weight what things are gonna move above or below the line and move into a sprint. So again, usually what you're looking for is low cost, high return, high ROI features. So it's often the case that we'll literally make a wisdom of the crowd spreadsheet where we'll list out each feature that could be in a sprint, and we'll have each person rank that feature based on different criteria. How hard is it to execute? How effective do we think it will be at driving a KPI? Is it driving revenue, or is it driving retention? And what's the risk profile that these might be off? And by aggregating everyone's view together, we can kind of get a baseline for these 3 or 4 features seem like the most promising ROI features to move into the next sprint. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Lucas.
I think Lucas is next.
Hey, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think you basically touched on it at the end there. I wanted to ask, how deep are you involved in the product cycle itself? You have all those numbers now, right? You see all those features being pushed out and have nice curves for what you believe they influence. But how deep are you now getting into the product cycle itself? Are you actually going to the product managers and telling them, hey, I think it would be better to maybe go more in this direction? Or is it mostly something like you mentioned for the executive area where you're hey, I believe this is a bigger vision we should follow? How deep are you in the trenches?
Yeah. Both. So again, sometimes the ask of the forecast is to tell a story for an executive, and that's a little bit different way of approaching the forecast, and I might be more likely to fudge numbers and push things around to tell a story. I don't know if I'm making sense, but hey, we need the line to always go up. And if you do a bottoms up forecast, there's this dip because the off season's going to happen. So help me figure out how to make this line smooth. It doesn't look nice that there's this hole. Whereas, on a game basis, that's not particularly useful to them, that there's fantasy numbers in a forecast. They want to have something that's very actionable. And the forecast isn't done in a vacuum, right? It's very important that I have buy-in from the team on what they're being asked to execute, and that they've applied some scrutiny to the assumptions that I've made. So it's not unusual that I will bring a forecast and say, hey, for next month, we're targeting this ARP DAU. Here's the ARP DAU that we had last month. Here's the new features we think are going to either add to that ARP DAU or maintain the ARP DAU that we have. How do you guys feel about this ARP DAU target? And yeah, I think there are times where I'll say, hey, based on my experience or based on what the forecast model is, we are not putting enough emphasis. Like, we need a lot more retention. We need to retain a lot more users than we're retaining right now in order to hit this forecast. And you guys are weighing too much in the monetization. We don't have a problem in monetization. We have a problem in retention. So we should push more retention features. And of those retention features, I think this is the best one. But I think the thing that I've learned the longer that I've been in the business is that I don't know anything. We're all making up as we go along. So I don't do that from a place of authority. I do it from a place of collaboration, right? Like the answer, the successful answer is the one that we can all get behind and believe in. So this isn't coming in and me saying like, you guys are wrong and this is the way to do it. It's knowing that this forecast is also a little bit confabulated, and that I have my own biases, and everyone's perspective is important in sort of getting to that group consensus of like what the target should be. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
I was going to add one other thing. I think too, from our experience, kind of going through, like, we're kind of very business focused at Mythical, and I'd say one of the things that we've kind of discovered working with a lot of game teams is actually a lot of teams, very few teams really understand like the unit economics of what drives their business. So kind of having them go through kind of this process, if you will, gives them a more holistic view on like, hey, like, how does marketing affect the numbers? How does this feature, and kind of bringing them along in the process, just I think is giving them a better understanding of kind of how the business operates at kind of a high level, and then obviously into the KPI level. So I think it's a way to have a lot of like conversations around like, okay, here's this feature, we think it's going to do X versus some of the other incumbents in the space or whatever. And there's a lot of healthy dialogue that kind of happens around the business itself, around features. I think is also kind of going through the forecasting process, kind of a net benefit to the teams. And I think there's a lot of, I think product managers kind of understand it, but kind of outside of that sphere of influence, like designers, some do, some don't.
No, I think that designers are kind of notoriously siloed from business reality. They want to have this purest view of the user experience. But you know what the worst user experience is? It's the one where the game shuts down.
Yeah,
the game doesn't exist anymore. And design is. Designers start their careers thinking design is about making things up, but design is really about effective communication. And if you can have the greatest idea in the world, if you can't communicate it effectively, or you can't get it in the game because you don't understand how the business of the game works, so you can't convince anybody that it's a good feature, then you might as well not have the idea. So it's super important for designers to understand how their design fits within the business of the game. Shimmy?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, what's your opinion about games that have its own token, and how it would affect the data when like the token price and volume and stuff like that would go into consideration in the whole calculation?
Oh man, that's a great question. And I don't know that I have a great answer. I think volatile token prices are generally not conducive to good user experience from a gameplay perspective, and they also make it really hard to forecast. A lot of that stuff is based on speculation and irrationality, and it's very hard to model. It's very hard to model irrationality.
Yeah, the idea is like with such games where token plays a big part in it, it just makes the whole process of doing any kind of speculations like much more complicated than like normal mobile games,
Yeah, for sure. And then there's also the problem of how do you recognize revenue from a token, and how do you do that in a way that whatever doesn't piss off the the community, if your token value goes up and then you're using a lot of that token value to fund the operations of your company, does that kind of raise scrutiny levels or concern? I don't know. Maybe Nick, you have more thought.
Yeah.
I spend more time talking and thinking about token value than I do.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's a it's a great question. And something even kind of a Mythical. I don't think we've perfected. I don't know if I'll have an answer, but I'll kind of talk a little bit about what we've seen. Definitely, like, token volatility does play an impact, especially on the secondary economy. So, for example, we had a kind of, if you look at like Rivals, a lot of the money that comes into the game via the secondary, a lot of people buy and sell cards. When they sell cards, typically most of them will take those tokens and kind of buy other inventory. Where we've seen kind of the biggest outflows of kind of people selling tokens onto the market is where there's been high volatility. So there was a time back, for example, last December, I think, where some YouTuber, kind of unbeknownst to us, wrote an article about Myth, and it basically spiked Myth like 300% in like the course of like 4 hours. And on that day, we kind of saw like the highest outflow of coins because people are like taking bids, and all of a sudden 3 hours later, their bag, if you will, is worth 3x, and people started cashing it out for USD. So it's definitely, to the point of like volatility, a big issue. One of the learnings, and something we might want to look at down the line kind of as a roadmap, is right now all of our assets are priced in Myth, which is a volatile currency, and we've talked about, should we price it in fiat, which is a more stable, and have Myth kind of the exchange under the hood kind of be we just kind of handle it for the user, so that if you price an asset on the market yesterday and you think you're going to get 50 Myth, and then the value goes up or down, like the USD value or fiat value, might be influenced heavily based on the volatility Myth. So one point I think we're looking at is possibly pricing our assets on a like fiat basis and having the Myth underneath it kind of float accordingly. But yeah, it's really hard to kind of predict, and we kind of don't be like these kind of peaks and valleys, if you will, are kind of like one-time events, and we really kind of just take a look at the kind of it across the lifespan of the product. So we haven't seen like volatility play too big of a factor outside of a few days here or there. And it kind of ultimately, it's really up to the game to manage the supply and demand side of those tokens. There's another exercise, like, yeah, if you as a company hold a bunch of those tokens and you can increase the appreciation of those token values, like maybe that's somewhere else in the calculation of the overall business and kind of the asset level. But yeah, we mostly, keep a close eye on like our sources and sinks, make sure there's enough demand side for the token, or even demand side for the, the cards, if you will. And we keep a very close eye on the sources for those assets. So I don't think it necessarily answers your question, but yeah, volatility can play a big role kind of on a day over day basis, but ultimately, like, it's really up to the game to really manage the demand and supply side, for the long tail across several years. So, I don't think we get too hung up on like daily fluctuations. It's really about kind of the overall structure of how the economy is put into place. And demand side is driven by features. It's driven by how much UA you're pulling into the game. So there's a lot of different factors that come into the demand side. But yeah, we don't get too hung up on the day over day. Like Myth's up 15% today, because who knows why? People are buying it or whatever, speculating. I don't know. But we don't. It's mostly around like just making sure the game's still healthy, like players aren't dropping out, and the sources and sinks line up, and the economy's still healthy is really what we keep an eye on. But it's probably an optimization on our side to price in a stable currency long term. I don't know if that answers your question necessarily, but if you have other questions, I can try to answer them.
Oh, well, thank you, guys.
Decker was making a point in chat about understanding how asset ownership influences retention, and we have done some A/B tests on that topic, and have seen that there's a relationship, a correlation between asset ownership and retention. Players and you see this generally in in games, right? The players that spend in games or spend on day one, someone who makes even a 99-cent purchase on day one, they're much more likely to retain in a game than someone who doesn't spend, because they've already made that commitment and kind of like then want to see the value of that engagement play out over time. Apostle?
Hi, Troy. I just want to ask you about your opinion on the new play to airdrop model that was recently introduced when it comes to driving user acquisition and possibly engagement. In general, do you think this is a sustainable model? What are your thoughts on it, out of curiosity?
So, big fan of play to mint, play to airdrop. I think probably maybe more play to mint than airdrop, because when you're thinking about user acquisition, who understands what an airdrop is? And the answer is, the 10,000 people on crypto Twitter that are, that are interested in crypto gaming. So the addressable market there just isn't that large. But I do think the idea of like rewarding players' engagement with an NFT, so whatever play to mint, and again, even if you don't call it airdrop, you just reward them with the thing inside of the game, and they don't have to have a wallet that you airdrop to. I think those are proven already mechanics. You see a lot of Asian games do this a lot, of like, hey, here's a sign up code. You pre-register for this new mobile game coming out. You give us your email, and then we'll give you 10 gotcha pulls for a legendary character when the game eventually comes out. So I think promising players free stuff for installing and engaging with the game is definitely a way to entice an install. Ultimately, you need a game that players want to stick around and play in for that to be meaningful. Like just getting them to install isn't the key, right? Getting them to install and then to have that asset and then play with that asset, and then that's what retains them. I think that's if you have the sense that you have a very valuable asset in a game, even if everyone else has one, you're still gonna feel powerful, and that sense of power is gonna make your progression feel smoother. It's gonna feel like that you're knocking down those walls, and you're progressing in a way that feels satisfying, feels gratifying. I'm just jabbering now. I do think that can work, but it is a lot about positioning and how you explain to a non-Web3 player what is the value of an ownable asset, and what a mint is or what an airdrop is. I think just promising them an item, even if it's not a blockchain item, may give you an equivalent value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's kind of engagement based rewards. Like actually in Rivals, the cards that go for the most amount of money were never bought. They're actually earned through engagement. So I think ideas in that dimension are probably super interesting. It's hard to see, gotcha might not be here forever, especially when you're talking about assets that have, real money value. Like first parties are kind of sniffing around that, Apple, Google, like they might allow that in the long term just because they kind of start getting into like kind of casino-like behaviors. So definitely think engagement based, kind of monetization and minting and mechanics are definitely probably a dimension worth investing in or investigating in for sure.
That makes me think about kind of a switch that happened in free to play, and this happened a while ago. This is maybe 6-7 years ago. They went from sort of like premium priced items to always engagement based items. So it used to be that like you want the $100 item, you'd go in the IAP store and you'd buy the $100 item. And at some point, games figured out that like the better thing to do was to have an event that you're playing through and have players get 80% of the way and then pay that last 20%. Say that like there's an event currency and you've got a week to earn enough event currency to win this item. And through just regular engagement, players are able to get 80% of the way there, and then that last 20% they need to spend to close the gap. And that creates this like elasticity to the value, because the value of the item isn't just what you spent for the item; it's that plus all of the effort that you engaged. And so then that the value of that item is almost not priceable, right? It's not just like it was the $20 you spent to get the item. It was the $20 plus the week of effort that you spent, and then players feel more attached to that item in terms of its value than just an item that they spent $20 on. Hopefully that makes sense. Any other questions?
Cool. Then
Yep.
It'll be interesting to know what Chrono Games' opinion is on the token and the forecasting, because they have a token already in their game in Forest Night. I don't know if they've to face any of those issues?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's super interesting and super new topic, right? Like no one really knows the recipe. Like how internally we think about it is we see the game as its own product and the token also as an own product. They do have symbiosis, like they do affect each other, but I wouldn't call them as a whole, as a one product, because the token needs different attention and the game needs different attention. The token needs different marketing. The game needs different marketing. Of course, but if one product does well, the other one usually is affected positively and also sometimes negatively. Doesn't have to, but it can be. So there is this connection between them two. But internally, we look at them and actually we would have two products, and we're looking at what the token needs, and then we look what the game needs, because it's just very different products in the sense, right? Games, engagement, etc. Retention. Token is more marketing, utility, syncs, flows, blah blah blah, right? So that's how we trying to like create like a system for Chrono games, and as more games coming into, the more connection is created between each product. So that's going to be very interesting in the future. So I cannot answer the question as well. It's very hard to say what is exactly the right question, but this is our view on how we try to solve this important issue in Web3 gaming.
I thought it was
To add to, I'm sorry, to add to what my partner said, is also depends on the game design a lot. As in, there is some games where the token is one of the main narratives in the game, you know, like let's say Axie Infinity SLP tokens or stuff like that, where it's really heavily based on the gameplay itself. So it really varies a lot from one product to another, how the token plays into the game, like how it affects the gameplay itself, you know. So there's no right answer. That's why I actually asked, because I was really curious how you guys also approach this, you know, because we're always learning, you know.
Yeah.
You have to remember compliance in the United States for tokens is maybe different than
Oh, that's another story, yeah.
Right.
That's another story, definitely.
It's literally separate businesses in the sense like we don't really control the token. The Mythos Foundation controls the token, and in order for it to be centralized, right, we want lots of other people to adopt the token. And again, as a game company, we're not supposed to have any influence over the token. They're meant to be separated.
Yeah. We also have the further complexity that because we're mobile, Apple, Google does not allow cryptocurrency within games. So we've had to abstract any of that through kind of a VC that's not actually directly a cryptocurrency that we use in the game called in-game credits. So yeah, it's definitely a little bit of complex beast for sure.
Cool. Are there any last minute questions, or we also can call it there? It's been a fantastic first workshop, I would say. Cool. On that note, Troy, Nick, thank you so much. There we go. And there's always one last one. You can fire away. I think it could have been a mistake.
It was a misclick. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's just a misclick. All good.
Cool. That's what I thought. Thanks so much, Troy. Thanks so much, Nick. Really appreciate it. Very, very interesting. And thank you so much for sharing the retention model as well. And big thanks to everyone for being here. Yeah, really do appreciate you taking the time. So thanks so much, Troy. Thanks so much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you,
guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Cool. See you guys on
Bye-bye.
Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Welcome.